I was staring at the empty loading dock behind my warehouse in Buffalo, New York, feeling like someone had just punched me in the gut, because 30 pallets of industrial-grade calcium chloride Deicer worth $60,000 had vanished into thin air overnight. My name is Lucas Thompson, and I run a commercial snow removal company that services everything from municipal parking lots to airport runways across western New York. February in Buffalo means we're in the thick of lake effect snow season, and that missing Deicer represented not just a massive financial loss, but potentially my ability to fulfill contracts with the city and 3 major commercial clients. I'd spent the better part of the morning on the phone with my warehouse manager, Tony, who swore up and down that he'd locked everything up properly the night before. "Boss, I'm telling you, those pallets were right there when I left at 8 p.m., Tony said, running his hands through his thinning hair. "The security cameras should have caught something." We pulled up the footage together, and what I saw made my blood pressure spike. At around 2 in the morning, a moving truck had backed up to the loading area, and 4 people had loaded every single pallet onto that truck. The license plate was partially obscured, but I could make out enough to know it was a rental. What really caught my attention, though, was the woman directing the operation. Even in the grainy night vision footage, I recognized that particular stance, the hands on hips, the aggressive pointing. Deborah Montgomery, president of the Lakeside Meadows Homeowners Association, and the bane of my existence for the past 6 months. I lived in Lakeside Meadows, a planned community on the outskirts of Buffalo that had seemed like a dream when I'd bought my house 3 years ago. Big yards, nice neighbors, reasonable HOA fees. That was before Deborah had been elected president last summer and decided to turn the place into her personal fiefdom. She'd started with small things: citations for leaving trash cans out 15 minutes too long, complaints about lawn furniture not matching the approved color palette, angry letters about my work truck being parked in my own driveway. "That's the HOA lady from your neighborhood, isn't it?" Tony asked, squinting at the screen. "Yeah, and she's about to have a very bad day," I said, pulling out my phone. Before I called the police, I wanted to understand what was happening. I drove straight to Lakeside Meadows, my mind racing through possibilities. Why would Deborah Montgomery, a woman who lived in a 4,000-square-foot colonial and drove a brand-new Lexus, steal industrial Deicer? It didn't make any sense until I turned onto Oakwood Drive and saw what she'd done. My entire street, along with what looked like every other street in the subdivision, had been covered in a thick layer of white material. My missing calcium chloride. She'd used $60,000 worth of specialized industrial Deicer to salt neighborhood roads like it was common rock salt from Home Depot. I parked in my driveway and walked over to where a group of neighbors had gathered near the corner. Jim Patterson, who lived 2 houses down, was examining the white coating on his lawn where overspray had killed the grass in a neat brown strip. "Did you see this, Lucas?" Deborah sent out an email last night saying she'd arranged for premium de-icing of all neighborhood streets as part of our HOA services. She made it sound like she'd negotiated some amazing deal, Jim said. I bent down and grabbed a handful of the material. It was definitely my calcium chloride, the pharmaceutical-grade stuff that I used for sensitive applications where environmental impact had to be minimized and corrosion resistance was critical. Each 50-pound bag of this stuff cost me about $200 wholesale, compared to maybe $15 for standard rock salt. "Jim, this isn't premium de-icing. This is industrial-grade calcium chloride that was stolen from my warehouse last night," I said, pulling out my phone to show him the security footage. His eyes went wide. "You're kidding me." I wish I was. That's $60,000 worth of specialized Deicer that I need for my commercial contracts. And she spread it around the neighborhood like it's sand on a beach. More neighbors had gathered now, and I showed them the footage. Barbara Chen, who'd been fighting with Deborah for months over a property line dispute, actually started laughing. "Oh, she's done it now," Barbara said. "I wondered where she got all that material. She had 4 guys spreading it everywhere yesterday evening and this morning. Must have used tons of it." I pulled up the neighborhood HOA Facebook group on my phone, and sure enough, there was Deborah's post from the previous evening, time-stamped at 9 p.m., just an hour after the theft. "Dear Lakeside Meadows residents, I'm pleased to announce that through my tireless efforts and negotiating skills, I've secured a premium de-icing treatment for all our neighborhood streets at absolutely no additional cost to our community. You'll see the application beginning this evening." This is the kind of proactive leadership your HOA board provides. Stay safe and enjoy your ice-free roads. Warm regards, Deborah Montgomery, HOA President. The comments below were a mix of thank yous and questions about what exactly had been used, given how much material was being spread around. Deborah had responded to those questions with vague answers about professional-grade materials and bulk purchasing power. I called the Buffalo Police Department and explained the situation. The dispatcher seemed confused at first, probably because grand larceny via HOA president wasn't something they dealt with every day. But she took down my information and said they'd send an officer to my warehouse to review the security footage. Detective Maria Santos showed up at my warehouse about an hour later. She was a no-nonsense woman in her 40s who listened to my explanation while taking notes. "So let me get this straight," she said, rewinding the security footage again. "Your HOA president stole 30 pallets of industrial Deicer worth $60,000 and then spread it all over your neighborhood, documenting the whole thing on social media." "That about covers it," I said. "And you're certain this is her?" She pointed at the figure in the footage. "I've had the misfortune of dealing with Deborah Montgomery for months. That's definitely her. Plus, the timing lines up perfectly with her social media posts, and the material she used matches what was stolen." Detective Santos made several more notes. "Okay, Mr. Thompson. I'm going to need copies of this footage, your purchase invoices for the Deicer, and any other documentation you have about its value. Given the amount involved, this is grand larceny in the 2nd degree, a Class C felony. I'll also need to visit the neighborhood to verify the stolen property was used there." We spent the next 2 hours going through paperwork. I provided invoices showing I'd paid $58,000 for that specific shipment of calcium chloride, along with documentation of its specialized nature. This wasn't stuff you could just buy anywhere. It came from a specialty supplier in Ohio and was formulated specifically for applications where standard rock salt would cause too much environmental damage or infrastructure corrosion. "Why is this so expensive compared to regular salt?" Detective Santos asked, looking at the invoices. "Regular rock salt, sodium chloride, is cheap, but it's corrosive as hell and terrible for the environment. It kills plants, contaminates groundwater, and eats through concrete and metal. This calcium chloride formula is designed to be effective at much lower temperatures, less corrosive, and environmentally safer. I use it for contracts with the airport and some municipal facilities where they can't risk the damage from standard salt. The city pays premium rates because it saves them money on infrastructure maintenance in the long run." Detective Santos nodded, understanding dawning on her face. So she essentially stole a Ferrari and used it to do the grocery shopping. Exactly. And spread it so thick that she probably used the entire shipment on a neighborhood that could have been treated with maybe $5,000 worth of standard rock salt if she'd done it legitimately. We drove over to Lakeside Meadows together, and Detective Santos took photographs and samples of the Deicer coating the streets. Several neighbors came out to talk to us, and more than one mentioned that they'd seen Deborah supervising the spreading operation personally, directing the workers she'd hired to make sure every street got covered. She was out here with a clipboard checking off streets, Barbara Chen told Detective Santos. She seemed so proud of herself. She kept saying how this proved she could get things done, and how the neighborhood had never looked so well maintained. Detective Santos took statements from 5 different neighbors, all of whom confirmed seeing Deborah and the work crew spreading the Deicer. By the time we were done, it was late afternoon, and the detective said she had enough to bring charges. "I'm going to get a warrant for her arrest," Detective Santos said. "This is pretty cut and dried. We have video evidence of the theft, witnesses placing her at the distribution of the stolen property, and her own social media posts documenting the crime. Does she have any idea you know what she did?" "I haven't talked to her yet," I said. "I wanted to go through proper channels first." "Good. Let's keep it that way for now. I'll be in touch." I went home and tried to figure out how to handle the immediate business crisis. I had 3 major jobs scheduled for the next week, and I'd been counting on that calcium chloride shipment. I spent the evening making phone calls to other suppliers, trying to source emergency replacement material. The best I could do was getting a partial shipment rush delivered from Cleveland at a significant markup, which would at least let me fulfill my most critical contracts, but it was going to eat into my profit margins severely. The next morning, I got a text from Jim Patterson telling me to check the HOA Facebook group. Deborah had posted a long rant, clearly directed at me even though she didn't mention me by name. "It has come to my attention that certain residents are complaining about the premium de-icing service I arranged for our community. Let me be clear. As HOA president, I have the authority to make executive decisions for the betterment of our neighborhood. I will not be questioned or second-guessed by residents who don't understand the complexities of community management. If you have issues with my leadership, you can attend the next board meeting and voice your concerns through proper channels. Otherwise, I expect gratitude, not complaints. The roads are safe and ice-free, which is more than they've been in previous winters." The comments section was exploding. About half the residents were confused about what complaints she was referring to, and the other half were pointing out that nobody had actually authorized this expense or questioned where the materials had come from. Barbara Chen had posted a comment asking directly how much the de-icing service had cost the HOA and requesting receipts, which Deborah had deleted. I was composing a response when my doorbell rang. It was Detective Santos, accompanied by 2 uniformed officers. "We're heading over to arrest Mrs. Montgomery now," she said. "I wanted to let you know in case things get interesting in the neighborhood. The warrant came through this morning. Want me to come with you?" I asked. "Probably better if you don't. We'll handle it professionally, but having the victim present might complicate things." I watched from my front window as the police cars drove past my house toward Deborah's place 4 streets over. I couldn't see her house from mine, but the neighborhood grapevine worked fast. Within 20 minutes, Jim Patterson was at my door with his phone out. "Dude, the cops just arrested Deborah. Someone got video," he said, showing me a shaky phone recording that one of the neighbors had taken. In the video, Deborah was standing on her front porch in an expensive-looking sweater and perfectly styled hair, arguing with Detective Santos. Even with the poor audio quality, I could hear her indignant tone. "This is absolutely ridiculous. I'm the president of this HOA. I was serving my community. Whatever misunderstanding has occurred, I'm sure we can resolve it without this kind of dramatic overreaction." Detective Santos remained calm and professional. "Mrs. Montgomery, you're under arrest for grand larceny in the second degree. You have the right to remain silent." "Larceny? That's absurd. I arranged for materials to be delivered to our neighborhood." "This is clearly a case of mistaken identity or confused paperwork. We have video footage of you directing the theft and distribution of $60,000 worth of stolen property. Please turn around and place your hands behind your back." The video showed Deborah's face going through a rapid series of expressions: disbelief, anger, fear, and then a forced smile as she apparently decided to try a different tack. "Officer, detective, surely we can discuss this inside like reasonable adults. I'm certain there's been some kind of confusion. Perhaps the supplier made a delivery error. These things happen in business all the time." But Detective Santos wasn't having it. She gestured to one of the uniformed officers, who stepped forward with handcuffs. That's when Deborah seemed to realize this was actually happening. She started demanding to speak to her lawyer and insisting that she'd done nothing wrong, that everything she did was for the neighborhood, that this was political persecution by residents who didn't appreciate her leadership. The video ended as they were loading her into the police car, with about a dozen neighbors standing in their yards watching the scene unfold. "Man, this is wild," Jim said. "I mean, I knew Deborah could be difficult, but I never thought she'd actually commit a felony." "I don't think she believed she was doing anything wrong," I said. "I think she genuinely thought she could just take materials from a local business and use them for the HOA, like she was requisitioning supplies for the greater good. That's insane." That's Deborah. Over the next few days, the story spread through the neighborhood like wildfire. The local news picked it up, running a story about an HOA president arrested for stealing industrial Deicer. The reporter they sent out to cover, it seemed to find the whole thing amusing, doing a stand-up in front of the heavily salted Lakeside Meadows streets while explaining that the white coating viewers could see represented enough specialized Deicer to treat a small airport for a month. I got calls from my clients asking if the theft would affect my ability to service their contracts. I assured them I'd secured replacement materials and wouldn't miss any scheduled treatments. The rush shipment from Cleveland arrived, costing me an extra $12,000 in expedited shipping and markup pricing, but at least I could fulfill my obligations. Deborah made bail the next day, and she immediately called an emergency HOA board meeting. I wasn't on the board, but several of my neighbors were, and Barbara Chen texted me updates throughout the meeting. According to Barbara, Deborah tried to spin the arrest as a misunderstanding and claimed she was the victim of a vindictive business owner who was trying to extort money from her. She insisted she'd arranged for the Deicer to be donated to the HOA and that I was falsely claiming it had been stolen. The other board members, who apparently had functioning brain cells, pointed out that the police had video footage and witness statements. The meeting ended with the board voting unanimously to suspend Deborah from her position as president pending the outcome of the criminal case. She stormed out, apparently shouting that they were all traitors and that she'd sue the entire board for defamation. A week later, I got a call from an attorney named Richard Keller, who introduced himself as Deborah's criminal defense lawyer. "Mr. Thompson, I'm calling to discuss the possibility of resolving this matter without a trial," he said in that smooth way lawyers have of making everything sound reasonable. "I'm listening," I said, though I was pretty sure I knew where this was going. "My client maintains that there was a misunderstanding about the ownership of the materials in question. However, in the interest of avoiding protracted litigation, she's prepared to make restitution for the materials used." "Your client stole $60,000 worth of Deicer from my warehouse, used all of it, and now wants to settle by paying me back," I said. "That doesn't address the additional $12,000 I had to spend on emergency replacement materials, the time I've lost dealing with this situation, or the potential damage to my business relationships." There was a pause. "What exactly are you proposing, Mr. Thompson?" "I'm not proposing anything. I'm the victim of a crime. The district attorney is prosecuting your client. If she wants to discuss restitution, that's something she can work out with the court as part of her plea deal or sentencing." "Mr. Thompson, I don't think you understand how these situations typically work. If you're willing to be flexible, we can make this go away with minimal fuss." "Mr. Keller, I don't think you understand that your client committed grand larceny, documented it on social media, and did it right in front of multiple witnesses. This isn't going away. If she wants to make restitution, great. That's what she should do. But I'm not dropping charges or agreeing to characterize this as a misunderstanding." He tried a few more angles, suggesting that I was being vindictive and that a criminal record would ruin Deborah's life, but I held firm. Eventually, he thanked me for my time in a tone that suggested he wasn't actually thankful at all and hung up. 2 days after that call, I got served with papers. Deborah had filed a civil lawsuit against me claiming that I had defamed her, caused her emotional distress, and maliciously prosecuted her. She was seeking $200,000 in damages. I sat in my kitchen reading through the complaint, which was full of creative reinterpretations of reality. According to her lawsuit, I had conspired to frame her for theft because of a personal grudge related to HOA violations. She claimed I had planted the Deicer in the neighborhood and then blamed her for it. She alleged that I had manipulated security footage and coerced witnesses into providing false statements. It was completely detached from reality, but it was also a real lawsuit that I now had to deal with. I called my business insurance company, and they connected me with a lawyer named Patricia Hoffman who specialized in defending against frivolous lawsuits. She was a sharp woman in her 50s who laughed when I explained the situation. "So let me guess," Patricia said. "She's trying to intimidate you into dropping the criminal charges by burying you in legal fees for a civil case. That's what it looks like. Classic move. Doesn't usually work, but people try it anyway. Don't worry, Mr. Thompson. This lawsuit is nonsense and we'll get it dismissed. In fact, depending on how aggressively she pursues this, we might be able to countersue for abuse of process." Patricia filed a motion to dismiss the lawsuit, arguing that Deborah's claims were contradicted by video evidence, police reports, and multiple witness statements. She also sent a letter to Richard Keller pointing out that filing a retaliatory lawsuit against a crime victim could have serious professional consequences if it was deemed to be part of a witness intimidation strategy. Meanwhile, the criminal case was moving forward. The district attorney's office assigned an assistant DA named Jennifer Park to prosecute. She reached out to me to discuss the case and let me know they were offering Deborah a plea deal. Plead guilty to grand larceny in the 4th degree, a reduced charge, make full restitution including my additional expenses, and serve a year of probation. "Is she going to take it?" I asked. "Her lawyer says she's considering it, but she's apparently having trouble accepting that she did anything wrong. She keeps insisting she was acting in her official capacity as HOA president, and that should give her some kind of immunity, Jennifer said, sounding tired. I've tried explaining that HOA presidents don't have the authority to confiscate private property, but she doesn't seem to get it. That sounds like Deborah. The offer is on the table for 2 more weeks. After that, we're going to trial, and she'll be facing the full charge with potentially years in prison if convicted. While waiting for Deborah to make a decision, life in Lakeside Meadows got interesting. The HOA board appointed an interim president, a retired accountant named Gerald Foster, who immediately launched an audit of the HOA finances under Deborah's leadership. What they found was alarming. Gerald called me one evening and asked if he could stop by to discuss something sensitive. When he arrived, he had a thick folder of printouts. "Lucas, I wanted you to know what we've uncovered because it's relevant to your situation," Gerald said, spreading documents across my kitchen table. "Deborah has been misappropriating HOA funds for at least a year. Small amounts at first, then increasingly larger sums. We're talking about $40,000 total that she spent on personal expenses and charged to the HOA. I looked through the statements. Charges to high-end restaurants, luxury retailers, spa services, even a vacation to Cancun, all paid for with the HOA credit card and categorized as business expenses. How did nobody catch this? I asked. She was in charge of the financial reports. She'd present summaries at board meetings but never provided detailed statements. When people asked questions, she'd get defensive and accuse them of not trusting her leadership. Eventually, people stopped asking. So on top of the theft, she's been embezzling from the HOA. Exactly. We're turning all of this over to the district attorney. I wanted to give you a heads up because it means the criminal case against her is about to get more complicated. Gerald was right. When the DA's office received the HOA's financial records, they added multiple counts of embezzlement to Deborah's charges. The plea deal offer was withdrawn, and Jennifer Park told me they were now pursuing the case aggressively. This shows a pattern of behavior, Jennifer explained. She clearly believes she's entitled to take whatever she wants as long as she can justify it as being for some official purpose. That actually makes the case stronger because it establishes intent and pattern. Deborah's civil lawsuit against me got dismissed about a month after it was filed. The judge issued a scathing ruling pointing out that nothing in her complaint was supported by evidence, and that filing such a lawsuit against a crime victim raised serious questions about her motives. Patricia Hoffman then filed a countersuit on my behalf for abuse of process and legal fees. "We'll probably settle that out of court eventually," Patricia said, "but it gives us leverage and makes it clear there are consequences for this kind of behavior." The criminal trial was scheduled for June. In the meantime, I had to deal with the ongoing fallout in the neighborhood. Deborah's supporters, and she surprisingly had a few, started a whisper campaign suggesting I'd somehow entrapped her or overreacted to what they characterized as an honest mistake. A few people posted on the HOA Facebook group, suggesting that I should drop the charges and let Deborah repay me privately. Barbara Chen, who had become an unlikely ally in all this, posted a detailed response laying out the timeline of events and pointing out that Deborah had not only stolen from my business, but also embezzled from the HOA. She included screenshots of Deborah's social media posts documenting the whole thing, and asked pointedly why anyone would defend someone who had stolen from both the community and a local business owner. That pretty much ended the sympathy for Deborah in the neighborhood, especially when Gerald released a statement announcing that HOA fees would have to increase to cover the shortfall from Deborah's embezzlement, unless they could recover the stolen funds. As spring arrived and the last of the excessive calcium chloride finally washed away from the neighborhood streets, leaving behind some dead grass and damaged landscaping that would need to be repaired, I got a call from Richard Keller again. "Mr. Thompson, my client is prepared to accept responsibility and make full restitution," he said, the smooth tone replaced with something more resigned. "We'd like to discuss a settlement that would satisfy both the criminal charges and your civil suit." "I'm listening," I said. "Mrs. Montgomery is prepared to plead guilty to all charges, repay you the $60,000 for the stolen materials plus the $12,000 in additional expenses you incurred, and repay the HOA the $40,000 she misappropriated. She'll accept whatever probation terms the court imposes and resign from all HOA positions permanently. What about my legal fees for defending against her frivolous lawsuit?" There was a pause. "She's prepared to pay $15,000 for your legal fees." I talked it over with Patricia, who said it was a reasonable offer. "We could probably get more if we pushed, but this gets you made whole without having to go through a trial. And frankly, a guilty plea on all counts is better than risking a jury trial where anything could happen." I agreed to the settlement. 2 weeks later, I sat in a courtroom watching Deborah Montgomery stand before Judge Harold Chen, who happened to be Barbara Chen's uncle, though he assured everyone he could be impartial. Deborah looked diminished somehow, smaller than she'd seemed when she was issuing HOA violations and organizing neighborhood initiatives. She was wearing a conservative suit, and her lawyer stood close beside her as Jennifer Park read out the charges. "How do you plead to the charge of grand larceny in the second degree?" Judge Chen asked. "Guilty, Your Honor," Deborah said quietly. "And to the 4 counts of embezzlement, guilty, Your Honor." The judge went through the full list of charges, and Deborah pleaded guilty to each one. Then he asked if she wanted to make a statement before sentencing. "Your Honor, I want to apologize to Mr. Thompson and to the Lakeside Meadows community," Deborah said, her voice shaking slightly. "I believed I was acting in the best interests of the neighborhood, but I understand now that I crossed legal and ethical lines. I let my position go to my head, and I hurt people who trusted me. I'm deeply sorry, and I'm prepared to face the consequences of my actions." It was probably the most self-aware thing I'd ever heard her say. Judge Chen seemed to consider her statement carefully before delivering his sentence. "Mrs. Montgomery, you committed serious crimes motivated by a sense of entitlement and a belief that your position gave you authority you didn't have. However, I'm taking into account your guilty plea, your agreement to make full restitution, and your lack of prior criminal history. I'm sentencing you to 5 years of probation, 300 hours of community service, and I'm ordering you to repay all funds as outlined in your settlement agreement. You'll also be prohibited from serving in any HOA leadership position for the duration of your probation. Do you understand these terms?" "Yes, Your Honor." "Let me be clear, Mrs. Montgomery. If you violate probation in any way, you'll be serving the remainder of your sentence in prison. I suggest you take this opportunity to reflect on how you treat other people's property and trust." After the sentencing, Jennifer Park told me that full restitution would be paid within 30 days per the settlement agreement. Deborah's husband, who I'd barely seen throughout this whole ordeal, apparently had substantial retirement savings that they'd be drawing on to cover the payments. "He's not happy about it, from what I understand," Jennifer said. "Apparently he had no idea what she'd been doing with the HOA money or about the theft. He thought the legal bills were for defending against false charges. I felt a little bad for him, but not too bad. At some point, you have to pay attention to what your spouse is doing, especially when they're managing community funds. True to the agreement, I received a wire transfer for $72,000 2 weeks later, covering the stolen Deicer, my replacement costs, and my legal fees. The HOA received their $40,000 around the same time. Patricia closed out the civil case, and I was finally done dealing with Deborah Montgomery. The neighborhood slowly returned to normal over the following months. Gerald Foster stayed on as HOA president and implemented new financial controls to prevent future embezzlement. The board now required 2 signatories on all expenditures over $500 and published detailed monthly financial reports. Several damaged lawns from the excessive calcium chloride got repaired at HOA expense, treated as a cleanup cost from Deborah's actions. I ran into Deborah once, about 3 months after the sentencing, at a grocery store. She was in the produce section, and we made eye contact across a display of apples. She looked away immediately and hurried toward the checkout lanes. I didn't try to talk to her. There wasn't anything left to say. My business recovered from the disruption. I fulfilled all my contracts for the remainder of the winter season, and even picked up 2 new clients who'd heard about the situation and were impressed with how I'd handled it. The replacement calcium chloride served me well, and I negotiated a better ongoing supply contract with the Cleveland distributor who'd helped me out in the emergency. Jim Patterson organized a neighborhood barbecue in July, partly to celebrate summer and partly to mark the unofficial end of the Deborah era. About 30 families showed up, and people were noticeably more relaxed than they'd been in months. Gerald gave a short speech thanking everyone for their patience during the transition and promising transparent, responsible HOA leadership going forward. "I know the last year has been challenging for our community," Gerald said, standing on Jim's back deck with a beer in hand. "But I think we've come through it stronger. We've learned the importance of oversight and accountability, and we've been reminded that HOA leadership is about service, not power." There was applause, and then Barbara Chen raised her glass. "And let's thank Lucas Thompson for standing up to corruption and not letting someone get away with theft just because they held a title. That made me uncomfortable, being singled out like that, but people applauded anyway." Jim clapped me on the shoulder and handed me a burger. "You did good, man," he said. "A lot of people would have just let it go to avoid the hassle." "It wasn't about being a hero," I said. "She stole $60,000 from my business. I couldn't just let that slide." "Sure, but you also didn't have to push back when she filed that bogus lawsuit against you. You could have folded and settled just to make it go away. Instead, you fought it, and now she's actually facing consequences for what she did." I thought about that while eating my burger and watching kids play in Jim's backyard. He was right in a way. The easy path would have been to settle quietly, take whatever money Deborah was willing to pay and move on. But that would have taught her that she could get away with it, maybe not completely, but enough. And it would have told other small business owners that if someone powerful enough stole from them, it wasn't worth fighting back. "I guess I'm just stubborn," I said finally. "The good kind of stubborn," Jim said. As the summer progressed, I heard occasional updates about Deborah through the neighborhood grapevine. She was apparently doing her community service at a local food bank, which seemed appropriate. Her husband had taken early retirement, and they were considering moving out of Lakeside Meadows, though they hadn't listed their house yet. Some neighbors felt sorry for her. Others thought she'd gotten off easy, but mostly people had moved on. I'd moved on too in most ways. My business was thriving. I'd started dating someone I met through one of my commercial clients, and I was spending less time worrying about HOA politics. but every time I checked my warehouse inventory or reviewed security footage, I thought about how quickly things could go wrong and how important it was to pay attention. The calcium chloride incident, as it became known in the neighborhood, had taught me several lessons. First, that people in positions of authority sometimes believe their title gives them rights it doesn't. Second, that documenting everything is crucial when dealing with potential conflicts. And third, that standing up for yourself, even when it's difficult and time-consuming, is worth it in the long run. Gerald turned out to be an excellent HOA president. He focused on practical matters like maintaining common areas, organizing reasonable community events, and keeping assessments low. He didn't try to micromanage residents or enforce petty rules. The neighborhood Facebook group, once a battleground of Deborah's pronouncements and angry responses, became a useful place to share information about local services and organize carpools. One afternoon in September, I was at my warehouse going over the supply orders for the upcoming winter season when Detective Santos stopped by. I hadn't seen her since the trial, and I was surprised by her visit. "Mr. Thompson, I wanted to follow up with you," she said. "I'm working on a case that has some similarities to yours, and I was hoping you could share some insights about how you handled the situation." She explained that another small business owner was dealing with theft by someone in a position of community authority. In this case, a church treasurer who'd been stealing from both the church and local businesses, claiming divine authorization for her actions. The victim is hesitant to press charges because he doesn't want to look vindictive or cause problems in his religious community, Detective Santos said. "I thought if he heard from someone who'd been through a similar situation, it might help him understand why it's important to pursue this." I spent an hour talking with Detective Santos about my experience, emphasizing that pressing charges wasn't about revenge, but about accountability and preventing future harm. She thanked me and said she'd pass along my contact information to the other victim if he wanted to talk. That conversation reminded me that what had happened with Deborah wasn't really unique. People in positions of trust and authority abuse that trust all the time, counting on victims being too intimidated, too busy, or too concerned about appearances to fight back. Every time someone got away with it, it made it easier for the next person to try the same thing. When winter came around again, I was fully stocked with calcium chloride and ready for whatever Buffalo's Lake effect snow could throw at me. My contracts were solid, my equipment was maintained, and my warehouse security had been upgraded with better cameras and additional locks. I'd learned from the experience and made sure it couldn't happen again. The first major snowstorm of the season hit in early December, dumping 18 inches on the city overnight. I deployed my crews at 4 in the morning, and we spent the day clearing parking lots, treating roads, and making sure all our clients were taken care of. It was exhausting work, but it was honest work, and I was good at it. When I got home that evening, tired and cold but satisfied with a job well done, I found a small package on my doorstep. Inside was a card signed by most of my neighbors in Lakeside Meadows. "Lucas, thank you for your integrity and for showing us what real community leadership looks like. We're grateful to have you as a neighbor." It was a simple gesture, but it meant more to me than they probably knew. I'd bought a house in this neighborhood hoping for a quiet place to live between the chaos of running a snow removal business. Instead, I'd ended up in the middle of an HOA drama that had consumed months of my life and cost me significant money and stress. But standing in my living room, reading that card, I realized that it had been worth it. Not because I'd gotten my money back or because Deborah had been punished, but because I'd stood up for what was right and refused to be pushed around. That mattered, not just for me, but for everyone in the community who might have been Deborah's next victim if she'd gotten away with it. I put the card on my refrigerator, next to a photo of my warehouse cruise and a reminder about next month's HOA meeting, where Gerald wanted to discuss snow removal for common areas. I smiled at the irony of that, given everything that had happened because of snow removal materials. My phone buzzed with a text from Tony asking about tomorrow's schedule. I sent him the crew assignments and confirmed that we had enough materials for the next 3 storms. Everything was organized, documented, and legitimate, the way business should be done. As I made dinner and settled in for the evening, I thought about Deborah somewhere in Buffalo, probably at home after another day of probation and community service, living with the consequences of decisions she'd made. I didn't hate her, not anymore. I actually felt a little sad for her, because she'd had everything: a nice home, a leadership position, respect from her community, and she'd thrown it all away because she couldn't understand the difference between authority and entitlement. The calcium chloride she'd stolen had long since washed away or been absorbed into the environment. The money had been repaid. The legal cases had been resolved. But the lessons remained, carved into the community's memory like words etched in stone. Don't take what isn't yours. Don't abuse positions of trust. Don't assume your title gives you rights over other people's property or lives. And if someone does wrong, hold them accountable, no matter how uncomfortable or difficult it might be. These weren't complicated principles, but they were important ones. And in the end, they'd been worth fighting for. I spent the rest of that winter focused on my business and my life, letting the Deborah situation fade into history where it belonged. Spring came again, bringing renewal and the promise of easier seasons ahead. The damaged lawns grew back, the excessive salt residue finally disappeared completely, and Lakeside Meadows continued its transformation into the kind of community it should have been all along. On a warm afternoon in May, almost exactly a year after Deborah's arrest, I was working in my yard when Gerald stopped by. "Lucas, got a minute?" he asked. "Sure, what's up?" "The board has been discussing the past year and what we learned from it. We want to establish an annual community service award to recognize residents who exemplify integrity and good citizenship. We'd like you to be the first recipient." I shook my head. "Gerald, I appreciate the thought, but I don't need an award. I just did what anyone should do when someone steals from them." "That's exactly why we want to give it to you," he said, handing me a paper with the award details. "Because you see it as normal behavior, not something special. That's the kind of attitude we want to encourage in this community." I looked at the paper. The Lucas Thompson Integrity Award would be given annually to a resident who demonstrated ethical behavior and community responsibility. There'd be a small plaque and recognition at the annual HOA meeting. "You're naming it after me," I said, "unless you object." We voted unanimously. I didn't know what to say. The whole situation felt surreal, going from being threatened with bogus lawsuits to having an award named after me. "I don't object," I said finally. "I'm honored. Thank you." Gerald smiled. "Thank you, Lucas, for everything you did and everything you taught us about standing up for what's right." After he left, I sat on my porch for a while, thinking about the strange journey that had started with discovering my Deicer stolen and ended with an award in my name. Life took unexpected turns, and you never knew where standing your ground would lead. The following week, at the annual HOA meeting, Gerald presented me with a small bronze plaque commemorating the first Lucas Thompson Integrity Award. About 50 neighbors attended, applauding as I accepted it. Barbara Chen took photos, and someone posted them in the Facebook group with a caption about learning from the past and building a better future. Deborah wasn't there, of course. She'd moved out of Lakeside Meadows 2 months earlier, relocating to a smaller house across town where nobody knew her history. I'd heard she was working as a receptionist somewhere, a significant step down from her previous lifestyle, but at least she was working honestly now. I kept the plaque in my home office, next to my business licenses, and a photo of my first snow plow truck from when I'd started the company 10 years earlier. They were reminders of different things: the plaque of integrity, the licenses of legitimacy, the photo of humble beginnings, but they all represented the same core principle: doing things the right way, even when the wrong way seemed easier or more profitable. As summer settled in and I started preparing equipment and contracts for the next winter season, I found myself grateful for the experience, strange as that sounds. Being the victim of theft isn't something anyone wants, and the months of legal proceedings had been stressful and expensive, even though I'd ultimately been made whole. But I'd learned things about myself, about my community, and about the importance of accountability that I wouldn't have learned otherwise. I discovered that my neighbors were better people than I'd given them credit for, that standing up to bullies was possible even when they had titles and authority, and that the legal system, for all its flaws, could actually work when you had evidence and perseverance. Most importantly, I'd learned that being right isn't enough. You have to be willing to fight for what's right, to endure the inconvenience and stress and expense, because if good people always chose the easy path, bad people would win every time. That lesson stayed with me as my business grew and Lakeside Meadows evolved into a genuinely pleasant place to live. The calcium chloride incident became a story that new residents heard about, usually with some combination of disbelief and amusement, and it served as a cautionary tale about HOA governance and community trust. Years later, I would sometimes drive past my warehouse and remember that February morning when I discovered the theft, the anger and disbelief I'd felt seeing 30 pallets of expensive Deicer simply gone. But I'd also remember the satisfaction of seeing justice done, the support of my neighbors, and the knowledge that I'd handled a difficult situation with integrity. The calcium chloride itself, that $60,000 worth of specialized industrial Deicer, was long gone, scattered across Lakeside Meadows streets and eventually washed into Buffalo's storm drains. But its impact remained, shaping a community and teaching lessons that would last far longer than any chemical treatment could. And that, I suppose, was worth more than any amount of Deicer, industrial grade or otherwise. Because in the end, what matters isn't the material that's lost or stolen, but how you respond when someone wrongs you and what you're willing to sacrifice to make things right. I never had problems with HOA leadership again. Gerald served 2 terms as president and then handed over to Barbara Chen, who continued his sensible, transparent approach to community governance. The neighborhood thrived, property values increased, and people actually looked forward to HOA meetings instead of dreading them. My business continued to grow too. I expanded into 3 more counties, hired additional crews, and eventually bought a larger warehouse with state-of-the-art security. I never forgot to lock up properly and always reviewed security footage regularly, paranoid perhaps, but also protected. And whenever someone asked me about the calcium chloride incident, as they occasionally did when the story came up at neighborhood gatherings or business events, I told it honestly and completely. Not because I enjoyed reliving the experience, but because it was a story worth telling, A reminder that ordinary people facing difficult situations could still choose integrity over convenience. That choice, repeated thousands of times by thousands of people in situations large and small, was what kept communities functioning and businesses operating fairly. It was what separated civilization from chaos, trust from suspicion, justice from mere power. Deborah Montgomery had made different choices, and she'd paid the price. I didn't celebrate her downfall, but I didn't regret my role in it either. She'd stolen from me and from my community, and holding her accountable had been the right thing to do, difficult as it was. Standing in my warehouse one cold December morning, years after the theft, watching my crews load calcium chloride for the day's jobs, I thought about how far everything had come. The business was strong, the community was healthy, and I could look at pallets of expensive Deicer without feeling that knot of anxiety in my stomach. The calcium chloride Karen had stolen was replaced, paid for, and forgotten. But the lessons she'd inadvertently taught about integrity, accountability, and the importance of standing up for what's right would last forever, shaping not just Lakeside Meadows but everyone who heard the story and took its message to heart. And really, that was the only ending that mattered.